The Vikings are done practicing until their preseason game in Seattle, which means it's a great time to revisit the 53-man roster. Let's hit it. It's the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Luke Braun, and hey, let's find some joy today. You can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is any audio listening platform or YouTube, Amazon Fire, Roku, whichever of those you prefer. Amazon Fire and Roku, just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Thank you so much for those of you who do listen to this show every single day. I appreciate you all so much making trips like this one where I can actually go back to where I grew up and watch training camp in person. You make this kind of thing possible, so I appreciate you all a lot. And since the Vikings have now completed the kind of first couple weeks of their camp, they are now going to a preseason game. You still can go to joint practices and stuff. Tickets are still available. Strongly recommend. But for now, they are off to Seattle. They'll be traveling today and they'll be playing tomorrow. So, I figured this would be a good time to revisit my 53-man roster prediction, which I didn't actually talk about on this show. That was on my Patreon page, but I'll go over what it was and what I would change to it right now. We'll make some adjustments now that I've actually seen some camp. And I have a little bit more information on who's playing, who's playing poorly and all of that stuff. This is at patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, and it was also kind of a dump of all of my opinions on the ongoing situations and stuff. I think Danielle Hunter hadn't quite signed his contract yet and all that, so there's still stuff about like that, right? So some clarity on those situations, clarity on injuries and stuff, and on depth chart things, where we end up. There's a lot that's changed since the last time I thought about the 53-man roster, but what has not changed is where the quarterbacks are. I think they're keeping three: Cousins, Mullins, Jaren Hall. I think Jaren Hall has very much played well enough to earn a roster spot, but probably hasn't outplayed Nick Mullins yet. He's had poor results for plays that I don't think were necessarily that poor of plays, but sometimes you throw the ball correctly and Kaylan Barnes makes a great play. Like sometimes that happens when you're on the threes. Or you threw a great one at Garrett Mogg that he dropped. Like that happened a whole lot. I think Mullins was just a hair more consistent than Jaren Hall, at least in what I saw. But hey, preseason will determine this a lot more than camp. So we're kind of only 10% into the thing, and it's like 6-4. So still a long time to go. In terms of the running backs, I probably am still sticking with it, although I'll probably change where I feel on the depth chart with Madison, Ty Chandler, Wongwu, McBride, and then, of course, CJ Ham counts here, too. Ty Chandler being RB2, I think, is pretty solidified. Kene Wongwu feels still like he's RB3, even though, hey, look, can't make the club in the tub, right? But hopefully he'll be able to get in and get some work at some point in camp. And then McBride, he feels more like he's on the roster bubble for me than I guess I would have said going in. I'm a big fan of him as a draft pick. I liked him a lot as a prospect. Couple of drops, though, because receiving was such a concern for him. Couple of drops really stick in my head. It's one thing to not be asked to receive just because that's the way your offense worked or your quarterback never checked down. It's another thing when you get into the ball catching drills and you mess up a bunch and you go, uh-oh, is this why UAB didn't do it? Hey, I'm not going to kill you over a couple of drops, but it is going to linger in my mind a little more in that context. That said, I still probably wouldn't take him off my roster projection, but like if I end up at 54 players, I'm going to think about it. Of course, they added Abram Smith over the course of camp, but I don't think he's going to make the team, but hey, maybe a practice squad guy, right? I actually am not going to change my wide receiver projection at all. I had Jefferson, Osborne, Addison, Naylor, and Powell. I think that's the group. I think not having Rager was something of a hot take a while ago. It is no longer one. And there's other guys that are interesting. N'Keal Harry had a good day at this little night practice in Shells. By the way, the Vikings did practice on Tuesday. It was a night practice, but they came out in Shells and they only practiced for half the time. They cut it off early. So it was kind of a little halfway thing. N'Keal Harry had some pretty cool plays on it, and maybe he's coming along and doing something, but I want to see a lot more from him to believe it. And I still think that Brandon Powell wins not only that punt return job, but that wide receiver 5 job. I think he's winning both competitions with Jalen Reagor. Here's the interesting one. It's tight end. Hawkinson and Josh Oliver are locks, of course, but then you get Nick Muse and Johnny Munt. Now, I had Nick Muse over Johnny Munt. I don't think I would have that anymore. From what I saw, Johnny Munt just did a little more than Nick Muse. Just made a couple more plays, was a little bit more consistent. Nick Muse had some lowlights that I just didn't see Johnny Munt have on his side. That said, still another one that, hey, we're only 10% of the way into this battle, and maybe it's 7-3%. We're still in the first quarter of a lot of these, so it's certainly far from over. But I think where I would go right now is I would much more heavily consider losing Nick Muse. But right now, my 53-man roster coming in feels a little bit less changey. I don't know the word. Things have not changed really all that much from this, and in a lot of these, I haven't changed a lot of the predictions that I had. By the way, I did write this before camp broke, or before camp opened. So yeah, and there's a date stamp on it. So I promise I didn't peek ahead. On the offensive line, again, I think it's going pretty chalk right now. Of course, you have your 5 starters, and then Blake Brandel, Schlottman, Udo, and Vidarian Lowe were mine. Here are the guys that I think could upset me here. I don't think I'm going to make a change here, but obviously I didn't have Chris Reed on there. He's ends up being injured, so it's sort of a moot point. We'll set him aside. But Josh Sokol being on the second team pretty consistently, and I think having a quietly pretty good camp at left guard, moving from center to guard, and having a decent camp or right guard, and then Blake Brandel being at the other guard position. And both of those guys playing pretty well. That's something that is easy to miss, but it feels like those guys have actually done a little bit better. Not so well as to even come close to like challenging any of those starters. Those starters are there, and they're completely set up, but get your Dalton and Reisner stuff, or who's out there, and are they going to sign a free agent? And look, man, they had all off season to do it. They're not going to do it. Be as mad about that as you want, but don't talk yourself into that they secretly have a plan to do it 10 seconds before the season opens. But the other thing I will say is Vidarian Lowe, who is somebody I did not have on the roster last year and ended up being wrong about, is I think has improved a little bit. So there's something to be excited about there. So I actually, looking at the 53-man roster, I'm not actually going to make any changes. I'm going to keep McBride and Muse on notice here, and we'll go into the defense. And if I want to add anybody there, but I struggle to find the place to like cut elsewhere, maybe we'll go back to Muse or McBride. But I'm not going to force the issue, I guess. But we will do the defense for the 53-man roster, and then I want to go over some players that have, I would say, a lot to gain in the coming preseason, the rest of camp. Players that maybe have more of an opportunity in front of them than we've really taken the time to appreciate. But before I do that, it is like peak fantasy football talk season. We're talking about redrafts, we're talking about all kinds of stuff fantasy-wise, and that brings us to Underdog Fantasy, and they have a format called Best Ball, that you should absolutely try out. Best Ball is one live snake draft, and you do no waivers and no trades in the season. Your roster just rides, and Underdog sets your best lineup every week for you. So it's all fire and forget, and it's, your preseason takes. What about, like, let's take those for a whole season. So try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. It's the largest fantasy football contest of all time. It is, and it's even bigger with a $15 million prize pool, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. And last year, the winner drafted their team all the way back in July. So get on it. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. Thanks so much to my hashtag everydayers. Sound off if you can. If you do listen to the show every day, I love you so much. And if you do go to patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, you can see, if you sign up, you can see my 53-man roster prediction, receipts on all of my preseason predictions. Defensive tackle mystified me. I think I'm getting it well, though. So I'm thinking defensive interior. So this is what the Vikings called nose and defensive end. I lumped them into one group because they all rotate around with each other anyways. But I think Phillips, Dean Lowry, Kyrie Tonga really stood out to me the last couple days. I think because I spent more time watching the trenches, I saw him, and I wonder if he's been doing it the whole time, and I just haven't seen it, and that's a me problem. But in particular, when I really took time to focus on what was going on in the D-line, whether it was with the ones or the twos, Kyrie Tonga seems like he's quicker with his upper body in particular, and a little bit more targeted there. Another really interesting thing, Esezio Tomowo, who I had in my 53-man roster, and I think will be, is, I'm not going to take him out, I guess, is playing as a stand-up rusher, a stand-up edge rusher. So he's out there with the outside linebackers and stuff. Now, that's only been in certain sub packages. He's also been a stand-up inside guy. And I think he's playing like the same position as Marcus Davenport, which sort of combines edge rusher and inside guy. Marcus Davenport has been in with the interior guys. And that line is just going to get blurred in this Flores defense. You don't have the Madden style, here's your left end, here's your right end, here's your DT1, here's your DT2. It does sort of blend depending on the front that they're in. Some of the fronts will have a nominal edge. I mean, it'll be Daniil Hunter. It'll be DJ Wanham playing inside, right? That's not necessarily asking him to switch positions. It's just using the quickness and length of an edge rusher against a guard and trying to make that sort of part of your stunt, part of your pass rush plan. But anyways, that also means guys like Esezio Tomowo go to the outside and play as a stand-up edge rusher. Really interesting stuff going on there with those formations, and especially in their 5-down formations, 5-man surfaces. Super cool stuff. But I do think Jaquelin Roy has had a nice camp, and then Bullard, Tonga, Dean Lowry, and Phillips are your like set up starters that feel like more of locks to make the team. And then behind those guys, you have players like Junior Aho or Sheldon Day that, are spending more of their time with the threes. Basically captured the twos here. And then at the edge rusher position, I will refuse forever to call them outside linebackers because I think that's just so confusing. They're edge rushers. They're Daniil Hunter. I put Marcus Davenport here, DJ Wanham, Patrick Jones. I know there's a lot of hype around Andre Carter, but Andre Carter just doesn't do it for me yet. He's not NFL strong. There's bull rushes that just break on linemen like water on a rock. And his hands aren't active and his feet aren't active, and he needs to have a plan. I mean, you need to construct a pass rush from scratch with this guy. He's got all the quick twitch in the world that doesn't do anything in the NFL. Linemen are just better than only being able to twitch. You really need to have more strategy applied than I've seen from Andre Carter. Inside linebackers, I had Jordan Hicks, Asamoah, Ivan Pace, and Troy Dye. At the last minute, I was like, you know what? It kind of feels like Troy Reeder might not be there. He's been with the threes all of camp. Ivan Pace, we have talked about him a ton. I don't need to spend ages and ages and ages on him. But hey, really, really cool story. We love to see undrafted free agents do that. I've loved to see the renaissance of Asamoah. Jordan Hicks has been quiet, but not in a bad way, just solidly doing his job. And Troy Dye has, I think, made strides as well. That group doesn't, like, on paper, that group inspires a lot less, a lot less hope than I think they did in camp. I think all four of those guys have given me reason to think, okay, they can be the group, and I feel better about, like, of all of the positions, I think linebacker is the one that I have come away from camp feeling the most improvement on how I feel about them. Like, I really came in going, all right, what's the linebacker sitch going to be? And I'm coming away from camp going, you know what? These guys are going to be totally fine. The cornerbacks, on the other hand, here's the thing about the cornerbacks, and camp kind of exposes them more than I think real game situations will, because in camp, the play doesn't stop when the quarterback gets sacked. So it's going to hide a whole bunch of stuff with the O-line, right? And you'll see it all the time. Like, there's a N'Keal Harry diving catch from Tuesday's practice you've probably seen a highlight of. really sick catch. Patrick Jones got a sack. Oh, I should mention Patrick Jones is one of my like risers too. They have talked about using him in more like versatile situations, but it's also, he's just been more disruptive. He's been in the backfield more and all of that. The one guy that I think might have a chance to make it onto the team again is Luigi Villan. I think Otomo is sort of shouldering him out because if you're going to have a rotational edge rusher, might as well be a guy that can play inside as well. And that versatility is going to shoulder him out when it comes to picking these last roster spots. But hey, if you're going, I don't think I'm going to keep Nick Muse on my roster, maybe keeping Luigi Villan and an extra D-line might be the way you want to go. But I digress. I kind of backed up there. Cornerbacks. Okay. Oh, yeah, this is the one where I put in Najee Thompson. Okay, so Byron Murphy, Caleb Evans, Mekhi Blackman. There is your three starters that had kind of already been hinted at by OTAs. They switched it back at the beginning of camp to Joejuan Williams being in the front with the ones, but then a few days into camp, Mekhi Blackman took over again, and now Joejuan Williams is squarely with the twos. And then, of course, Andrew Booth, Jay Ward, and then I put in Najee Thompson as kind of, hey, he might make it as a special teamer. I said that on the Minnesota Football Party too. Watching him on special teams, he was not the standout that I think the Vikings were expecting bringing him in. No big deal. If anybody gets that job, to me, it's Tay Gowan. Tay Gowan has taken that kind of place for me in my brain. But I think it's also not unreasonable to put Joejuan Williams in as well. But I think Tay Gowan is probably an easy enough practice squad stash, and since he's played pretty well as a DB, he's made a lot of plays in camp. Honestly, he's been very quietly stacking pretty good days, and that gets you in. While Joejuan Williams has been a little bit more up and down, but Joejuan Williams is still with the twos, and Tay Gowan isn't. So until that changes, it's really hard for me to say, okay, they're gonna like cut that guy, but I don't know. I think with the special teams contribution, if I were making the choice from what I have seen, Tay Gowan feels like a better use of a roster spot than Joejuan Williams does. But I don't know if the Vikings have really shown that they agree with me. So I'm like trying to think this through real time. Who would I put in? Be one of those two. Who do I put into this Najee Thompson spot? I'm going to go with Tay Gowan. Let's do it. Tay Gowan's in my 53-man roster prediction. Let's go. I think that's just so fun. I mean, look, he's 1-1 on making rosters, right? He made the roster as a 6th-round pick, didn't make it in the next year after he had been traded to the Eagles. So it's not like I'm projecting, some random guy that's some Christian Delorio that's never been on the team, right? He's been in an NFL room before. And then, of course, the safeties are pretty simple. Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, Josh Metellus, Lewis Seen. Call Jay Ward the 5th safety if you want. But this is also still in this group. And I guess talking about Lewis Seen too, I've been critical of him in camp. I don't like what I've seen from him in camp. It's been kind of slow. Watching him in drills, it's just been relative to his peers, unathletic. He just looks slow and clunky and clumsy. He might be because he's hurt though. And it actually makes a lot of sense that it would be because he's hurt. Because he has been he was a great tester, right? Like he had good athletic testing and all that. So, and he was like a high potential guy who's rangy and explosive in college. We've seen him be more athletic than he is now. And it's like, okay, well, he's either dealing with being dinged up or he's still recovering from the compound fracture. Maybe that's why. And I'm super willing to believe that that's the reason. And if he does, show out way crazier than I'm implying right now, then it's probably reasonable to guess that that's the reason. And then, of course, the specialists, Greg Joseph, Ryan Wright, Andrew DePaola. Greg Joseph is in a battle with Jack Podlesny. Jack Podlesny has outkicked him so far in terms of what I have seen, but I've only seen 2 days of real kicking competition. So we'll see if Podlesny can keep it up. Consistency is the name of the game, of course. So I actually only ended up changing one spot. I moved out Najee Thompson. I'll leave Muse and McBride in, but there's sort of question marks for me. If I feel like I wanted to bring in Luigi Villan, I would maybe do that. Or if I felt like I wanted to bring in maybe both Tay Gowan and Joejuan Williams, maybe I would, then get rid of Nick Muse or Dwayne McBride. But I think that both of those guys, they can stay on the roster for now. The last thing I want to mention is there are some players with, I think, a lot to gain going into the preseason, and I want to talk about how some of those stories and where they are. So it's a Locked On Vikings podcast. We're going to keep it rolling. So, moving on here to some players that I think have quite a bit to gain. And I think I already kind of mentioned it. Josh Sokol, the guard. I think Josh Sokol has an angle at a roster spot here. I've said it earlier in this show. Can't make the club in the tub. And that is where Chris Reed is at right now. He has not been participating in all of camp. He had surgery. He's on the NFI. That is like, you don't go into camp thinking that Josh Sokol's a better player than that or anything. But hey, if he goes and plays well and the other guy's not available, then I'm keeping the dude that was here. We're a long way away from that, though. Josh Sokol has done okay. I've seen him win plenty of one-on-ones, and I've seen him play decently in teams. But he's got to go into the preseason and do well. If he has a good game in the preseason, then we start watching, does this guy make the roster? And then we'll have our joint practices, another preseason game and stuff. And I think by the end of 3 preseason games, we'll have a very, very, very clear sense of this. But I think he is somebody with a lot to gain in terms of actually going from, Sacred Heart's finest to an actual 53-man roster Viking player. I do not think it is impossible. The Vikings are want for depth at guard. They need depth guards really bad. They have a converted center and a converted tackle as their second team guards. So we're like, that is wide open. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a guard coming from another team on the 53-man roster, or maybe you cut it down to 52 and you bring in Reisner or something like that, because they just don't have nominal guards on the second team at all, outside of guys on the threes that you didn't even that were undrafted rookies or futures contracts guys or whatever. But Sokol in his second year is, and I think undrafted free agent lineman in particular, line is a position that is a little more open to those undrafted guys coming in and being that kind of story, especially if they can slowly and methodically develop over a little bit more time. So, in your second year, you take a leap. Your third year, you take a leap. I think Sokol has, it feels like with a good preseason, this is something. With an okay preseason, and we're probably sticking status quo. But if he has a legit awesome preseason, there's a lot to gain. I think somebody like Tay Gowan, if he can continue it, has a lot to gain in the preseason. This is somebody that's probably going to go up against third teamers a lot. He's on the third team right now. And so it gives him a chance to show out. And if he can show out when the bullets are truly flying in an actual game scenario, keep it up through the joint practices and all that, then again, there's that roster spot on the line. And I think it's an open one between Williams and Tay Gowan and Jalen Williams and Kalen Barnes, Najee Thompson. All of those guys are fighting over one spot. And I think in a similar way, somebody like Theo Jackson that's been playing big nickel with the twos and has been even in with the ones a little bit and is getting all of these opportunities can find his way, at least on the practice squad, which is where he was before, and at least, maintain that part of it and continue to develop, hopefully. As with Harrison Smith, maybe he's in his last year, maybe he isn't. But either way, imminently, that room is going to open up a little bit with, maybe Lewis Cine gets more opportunities to start, but that also means an open roster spot. Maybe that roster spot could be Theo Jackson's. That's a long-term future thing, but it starts with, good preseason in August of 2023. Looking through other kind of guys that could make it, I think for this, both Johnny Munt and Nick Muse can find themselves carving out bigger roles with a good preseason. But they also have so much to lose. And I actually want to think about somebody like Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth. I'll put them in the same category here, and they have something to gain in a different sense. Rather than, hey, a really good preseason could mean they're the dark horse to sneak onto the roster, which is sort of what this segment has morphed into. For Booth and Cine, if they can string together a good preseason, they could get playing time, which they are currently, neither of them are getting at all. And honestly, for my money, both of them have looked pretty poor. So if they can put it together in the preseason and prove me wrong, or maybe that was just camp disadvantaging DBs, which it does tend to, and maybe they were just dealing with injuries. If they can get healthy and string together some good games and get some playing time, they can put their careers back onto a better track, the kind of track that you would expect from a first and a second round pick in their second year now. Right now, we are staring down the barrel of those two guys not contributing at all. And I think that the Vikings coaches would be correct to do so because they're just not the better players. That sucks for them and their pedigrees, and for Kwesi, who drafted them and stuff. That's bad. So a good preseason can mean everything for those guys. And I think Dwayne McBride has so much to gain going into this. The other guy that's kind of on my bubble, because running backs in particular, like all of the running backs, this kind of counts for, except I guess Alexander Madison, who already has that starting role. But Ty Chandler can solidify a rotational role. Kene Nwangwu, if he can get healthy, have a good preseason, he can solidify a role. But Dwayne McBride in particular, hopefully he'll get a lot of run, right? And a lot of reps. You give the rookies a lot of reps. That's how it goes. But, hopefully you'll be able to see him go at a little bit more full speed than you usually see in camp. In camp, they don't tackle. They play two-hand touch in camp. And so that means it's really difficult to assess exactly, running backs are judged on how many yards they can eke out at the end of a run, right? We don't judge running backs on the first 4 yards of a run where it was open and you're just following your blocking. And maybe we should actually credit running backs with more of that, because reading it right, spacing it right, angling yourself correctly, and making the right decision is skillful. But it's the last 2 yards, and whether that's 2 or 4, or did you break a tackle and make it even more, that's where running backs kind of separate the men from the boys. And you just don't see that in camp because it's two-hand touch. You're not breaking you can't break a two-hand touch tackle. You can't slip out of that one. You got touched, you're down. So in the preseason, where it's a little bit, where it looks more resembles football, all of the running backs things will clarify a lot with those guys. And I think that's maybe one of the things coming into the preseason that I am going to focus on the most is the running backs in particular. And I want to focus on, I've said it before, but I'll say it again if you missed those episodes. I want to focus on the small guys. So Brandon Powell, one of my standouts of camp, of all of camp. Everybody who's watched camp came away with going, man, that little guy looks good. Ivan Pace, same thing. That little guy looks so good. And he's been such a standout of camp. Jordan Addison, he's been flashing all the time. Will he fall apart when the physicality gets a little bit more real? These little guys, let me see what these little guys have when, real big-sized NFL players that don't care if they get injured and haven't been coached to play soft because it's practice, playing at full game speed. Big guys, full game speed on these little guys. Let's see if they hold up and how their game responds to that. But ultimately, this is the preseason is, and we'll preview the preseason game in a little bit more depth on tomorrow's show, but the preseason is a proving ground for players in position battles. You're not going to see Kirk, you're not going to see JJ, you're not going to see Danielle Hunter or any of those guys. So don't get your hopes up that you're going to see one drive of Kirk Cousins. They've already said that's not going to happen. We'll see a little bit of Addison. That's fun. But really it's a proving ground for people who are earning their keep. So let's see who can earn their keep. I'll talk to you about it tomorrow. I should be back on the regular setup, so you won't have those audio glitches where it sounds like someone's flipping through a book in front of the microphone. I don't know what that is, and I don't know how to fix it. I think it's just part of being on rural internet, so I'm super sorry about it. Either way, it's in our past now. I'll see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skull.